Hi folks, this is Chris from Punk Paisley, and we're going to hit you today with a top 10. People like a list, people like a top 10 list, they like a bottom 10 list, and my list today is top 10 bands in terms of visual gimmick. Now I'm not talking about visual performance, so we're not going to be talking about Arthur Brown or Alice Cooper stage shows. And I'm also not talking about G.G. Allen eating a box of laxatives, as visually impactful as that was. No, I'm talking more about things that the graphic design and look of the band being as important or a major portion of the overall package of the band, to the point where you can't really you can't separate the music and the visuals. Consistency through time in presentation, impact of that presentation on other groups and so forth. So here's my top 10 without further ado. Number 10, we're going to reach into a genre or subgenre that I don't think I'll be talking a whole lot about on my channel, and that is hair metal. I know. And I was a teen in the 80s. And hair metal was huge. And the band Stryper. Never thought I'd be talking about Stryper. But Stryper had a particular visual impact with their black and yellow stripes. They were a Christian hair metal band, if you can imagine such a thing, who had some sales success in the 80s. And their visual impact was, we're bees. We're Yellow Jackets, we're Hornets, we're a caution sign at the construction site. We might be Pittsburgh's long-lost NBA franchise. That's Stryper. And what's kind of funny is I had the same English teacher throughout high school. All of us did, thanks to tracking in the Philadelphia public school system. I was in a class of 33 kids, and it was almost the same 33 kids throughout high school, same teacher. We didn't have assigned seats, but owing to the fact that the first year of my being in that class, the first couple of days, owing to some sort of snafu with paperwork, I was in a different class for a day or two. So I was the last one to come in to this new class, and then had my seat cemented socially, not assigned. But the kids in that class would pick a seat, and that was their seat for the next 4 years. Just for that one class. And so I'm in the back in the corner, and I'm sitting next to a metalhead named Steve. And Steve becomes my friend and classmate for multiple years in the same class in English. Steve's a metalhead. I'm in the punk. In the 80s, these were two nodding acquaintances, but rivals. We were in a major urban school that had all the different cliques of kids, any genre that you could imagine. There were the goth kids and the metal kids and the punk kids. This is the largest public school, the largest high school in Pennsylvania. So we had every variety of kid. So it wasn't like some of you unfortunates who I understand in rural areas, that any students whatsoever who were interested in any rock and roll at all had to band together. So, you had your Smiths kid and your Metallica kid were friends because everybody hated both of you. Well, we had the luxury of being able to subdivide into rivalries. For multiple years, the debate between Steve and I was, it was the Lincoln Douglas debates at such a high level. I would say things like, dude, punk rock rules. And Steve would retort, like a philosopher king, no, dude, metal rules. And then, so we had this Beavis and Butthead, style debate that went on for multiple years. And Steve's wardrobe was entirely, metal t-shirts. He liked his Metallica, but he wore a lot of hair metal t-shirts. He did not own one. he owned 2 Striper t-shirts. 2 Striper t-shirts. Now, what's incredible about this is that our friend Steve, and I'm calling him Steve because that's his real name, our friend Steve, Jewish. He's Jewish. He's got 2 t-shirts from a Christian hair metal band that didn't sound appreciably different and arguably maybe even worse than a lot of the other hair metal bands. So my thing is, if you have such a great visual gimmick that you're a Christian rock band that gets a Jewish kid to buy 2 of your t-shirts, tip of the hat. That is you have figured out something marketing wise, and you deserve to be on this list. So number 10, Striper. I can't leave them off. Number 9, I'm going to go with Cheap Trick. Cheap Trick has actually 3 levels of visual consistency. We see this most graphically, excuse the pun, on Heaven Tonight. The Cheap Trick visual impact is that you've got your two front guys. You got your front office here. You got the hot receptionist here to greet the clients. You got your two dream boys, and then as if they're another band, they're two bands in one. You got the weirdos, and these guys were good enough to be. They were gracious enough that they were in on the joke, and this was a consistent visual consistency. So you got you got 2 bands in one, and they're writing this for all it's worth. And there are 2 further visual consistency gimmicks with Cheap Trick, which are the logo with and we even see it on the back of Robin's jacket here. The logo with the blurry typewritten Cheap Trick, the repetition of Cheap Trick, the words. And also, they seem to have they had very much a black and white checkerboard pattern thing going. So that's sort of what I'm talking about with some of your visual gimmick that is inseparable from the band, inseparable from your impressions of the band. Number 8 is a band that is going to come up, I think, a lot on my channel, including I'm going to do a video on underrated bands or bands that are sort of written out of the history of 60s rock, and that is Paul Revere and the Raiders, hailing out of Boise, Idaho in 1959 and dominating the 60s charts, constantly on TV, and very much a visual band. They have a member whose actual birth name is Paul Revere, and what you got to do with that? You're going to work that into matching outfits. Now, Paul Revere and the Raiders did not invent the matching outfit. This goes back to your doo-wop bands, your doo-wop vocal groups, who are your soul groups are wearing matching suits. A lot of your rock bands, early rock and roll bands, are wearing matching suits. The Beatles are wearing or were put in matching suits by management, and you have you probably have this taken from big bands that are wearing matching suits, who have probably taken that from the territory bands of the 30s. The smaller bands have become big bands wearing matching suits, and you could probably date this back to New Orleans early jazz and marching bands who are wearing outright John Philip Sousa uniforms. So there is a history of visual consistency with in American musics that makes its way out. It kind of falls apart with the hippie thing when people are individuals, man. But Paul Revere and the Raiders ran it all the way. They took it all the way down. They kept with the suits until the 1970s, when there's even different members of the group. And they changed the name they drop it just to Raiders or the Raiders. But garage bands consistently, early, mid-60s, have the matching suits, and who did it with more impact than anybody else? Who did it on national TV more regularly than anybody else? It's Paul Revere and the Raiders. You have the group, the New Colony 6, who are virtually copying, there were 6 of those guys, but are virtually copying not only the visual impact of the suits, but they're even doing the colonial thing. And it's kind of funny, those 2 bands from Idaho and Illinois, so not even the East Coast colonies. Number 7 is very much along the same lines, but I'm crediting them here on the list and putting them ahead of Paul Revere and the Raiders for 2 reasons. One is because I think that they came up with this independently from the Raiders in Europe, and because their impact of the same matching outfits or even over-the-top outfits, and there's a fly here. That's wonderful. There's something for visual impact. That would be the Spotniks. The Spotniks out of Sweden. I have talked about them in another video that I did about some bargain generic European albums. The Spotniks were around forever, starting in 1958, which may explain why there's the space race fascination with them and the reference to the Sputnik in the name. But we also have, they released 43 albums in the time they were together, from 1958 until I believe it's the mid-20-teens. That's ridiculous. It's like almost 50 years of being a band, over 40 albums. I don't know how many singles. I don't own a Spotniks album. I do own a few Spotniks singles. I showed you a few of them in another video. And you've got the Space Vanguard. This is the birth not only of uniforms, but over-the-top uniforms. Completely over the top. The spaceman outfits, the visual impact. You don't get, later out of Europe, you don't get the French band Rockets. You don't get Man or Astroman in the States without the Spotniks. So, respect in number 7. Number 6, we have AC/DC. AC/DC has 2 visual consistency things going for it that were consistent for parts of 5 decades and beyond. In one case, you have the logo, the AC/DC logo with the lightning bolt, which parents were worried in the 70s and 80s was Antichrist, Devil's Children, and you have Angus Young's schoolboy outfit. Angus Young, of course, this leads a little bit into his performance. He's doing some Chuck Berry stuff. He's doing some having conniptions stuff, which is sort of the Joe Cocker of guitar in some ways. But you see a schoolboy outfit. You see that logo. That's AC/DC. If I say the syllables AC/DC, you're going to visualize that logo in your head, and you're going to see Angus Young's schoolboy outfit. There's no separating the 2. In 5th place, Black Flag. Black Flag has 2 things going for it with visual impact. This is going back to the 80s when you have, I've talked about this in another video. It's pre-internet for all intents and purposes, and you're staring at the record cover. You're listening to the album, you're going to stare at the record cover. You hope there's some art there, and it's a package. The album was more of a package than it is now. Everything wasn't on shuffle. You would take the time to physically remove the album. You have to select the album. What am I in the mood for? I select the album, and I've got to take it out and place it on the turntable. You're doing headphones or no headphones. There's a little ritual involved, and then you've got the album cover, and you're going to sop up the visuals with the record. And the 2 are intertwined in a way which is probably difficult, if not impossible, to replicate in the 2020s. Well, Black Flag, 2 things going for it. One is one of the best logos ever. One of the best logos ever. There's a whole documentary film just about people who have the tattoo of the Black Flag logo. And most of the people who have the tattoo of the Black Flag logo don't even have the words Black Flag because they don't need it. You see that logo and you know. Now, when I've read interviews or seen interviews with Greg Ginn, and it's really very much his band. But why the name Black Flag? I think they originally started as Panic, and Black Flag had multiple associations and connotations. There was the bug spray, the pesticide, there was the pirate flag, there was anarchism, and he said, we like them all. We like the mash of all of those at once. And the logo does similar things. The logo is a visual representation of a flag aflutter, but it is also, you could see four individuals becoming one thing. Most of the bands run, they are four, there's some lineups they have five. Most of the bands run, they're four people. And what a wonderful, if they're not teaching people in visual arts classes and branding classes or anything about the Black Flag logo, they should be, because that's that. On top of that, you have the Pettibone art. Raymond Pettibone, of course, not his birth name. It is inseparable. You cannot separate the SST label, and you cannot, if I'm talking to you about Black Flag, you are seeing these disturbing line drawings that are on the covers of every album. When Black Flag releases Everything Went Black, my understanding is because there were problems with the LAPD and trying to make sure that their records could actually appear in stores, so they have the word black, and the visual representation is a Pettibone drawing, and you don't need anything else. You don't need the name of the band on the album. That's how much the two are intertwined. I find it acceptable for other SST releases, especially if they have Black Flag material on them, like the Blasting Concept, the Blasting Concept 2. I think, oh, well, that's okay. You could still use that. It's very much the same aesthetic. I believe there's a Sonic Youth release that also has some Pettibone art, and I'm against it. I'll talk about my Sonic Youth take on another video, but I'm just thinking you can't, nobody else. I understand that the man, he's using his art, getting his art out there, he's hopefully getting compensated, making a living. Nobody else, the two are so intertwined that bands that are not Black Flag, they just can't. It feels wrong. It feels like there's a desecration of somebody else, or a misappropriation, cultural appropriation, if somebody else takes and uses the art. Number 4 for your visual impact. Heavy hitter, I'm going Crass. Crass, the anarcho-punk, the British anarcho-punk band. Yes, there were other people using stencils because stencils were because stencils were the cheap and easy thing to do, but nobody used stencils like Crass, and nobody used stencils as much as Crass. And nobody had, Crass was as much a visual arts project as a band. There were times when I'd argue they were a better visual arts project than a band. There is no mistaking the art, and it is copied to this day, but it is copied 50 years later by other anarcho-punk bands. They established something and stuck with it. The words, the images are inseparable from the music, sometimes more important than the music. Number 4 is Crass. In third place, number 3, we have Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden and Eddie. The band has a mascot. The band not only they have their own font, so that helps you get into the third place, but they've also got a mascot who appears on cover after cover. What's Eddie going to be this time? What's Eddie going to do this time? Is he piloting a plane? Is he in ancient Egypt? What's Eddie doing? He could be doing anything. He could be in the British military. We don't know, but we know there's going to be Eddie. There's going to be Eddie. And Eddie is incorporated into stage shows as well. So that is some pretty... If you say Iron Maiden, you're picturing Eddie doing something probably dangerous. In second place, another band where the visuals, I say the band's name and you see the visual before you hear the music in your head, as good as the music is, and that is Devo. Are they not men? They are Devo. D-E-V-O. Now, part of the whole devolution dark art project that begins in the early 70s, pissing off hippies in Ohio, is the matching outfits, the lack of individualism, the hearkening and hastening of the devolution, and eventually, more than anything else, the flower pot hats. The flower pot hats, if you say the words, if you say to somebody of the right age, new wave, and I'm going to do a video about what exactly what are the boundaries of new wave anyway. But if you say to somebody new wave, even though we can make an argument, and perhaps I will, that Devo is art rock, punk, new wave, but the Whip It video and the flower pot helmets, 100%. Are the image of new wave in the average American of a certain age's head. They just are. You cannot separate the visual unity of Devo from there's an aesthetic of when they do a cover of Satisfaction or something like that, they're stripping individualism and feeling from the music, and they're stripping visual individualism from the aesthetic at a time during a period when society went radically in the other direction from Paul Revere and the Raiders. It went away from the matching outfits. It went away from the matching uniforms. And Devo says, oh no, matching uniforms are coming back with a vengeance, And we are swimming upstream. So number 2 is Devo. Number 1, there can only be one number 1. And band number 1 doesn't have a visual gimmick. Band number 1 is a visual gimmick, and that would be Kiss. Kiss, everything about Kiss. Now, I'm not a huge Kiss fan. There are a couple of Kiss tracks that I like, but I have to tell you, as a child of this, when I was a child in the 70s, and especially a male child in the 70s, it is impossible to get across the craze for Kiss, which, when you look back, is really very much based in the visuals. First off, you have the iconic logo, which, in the same way that AC/DC was Antichrist, Devil's Children, Kiss was Kids in Satan's Service, so said concerned parents and questionable youth pastors who probably had their own thing going on with the children that in the church basement that we won't talk about. But the makeup, not just the makeup, not just the fact that we have makeup which is the same but different for each of us. And when we swap out a member of the band, that new member has his own separate, somewhat individual makeup, despite an overall complementary look between the band. But the fact that they're not going to take the makeup off. I'm telling you that in the same way that George Lucas was a filmmaker who became a toy salesman disguised as a filmmaker, Kiss are a merchandising empire disguised as a rock band, or a pop band with a gentle ballad, or a disco band. They'll play whatever you want. They don't care. It's not about the music. It's about the merchandising. It's about taking some of your own blood and putting it in the red ink for a comic book featuring your faces and makeup. But the toys, the posters, we'll get albums out. We can't get another album out yet because we're on tour, so we'll put out a live album. We'll put out another live album. And all about the visuals. There were the toys. There were kids who would buy the Kiss dolls. They had the little G.I. Joes with Gene Simmons hair and makeup, and would try to scrape the makeup off of the paint, off of the doll, to get a better look at what Kiss might look like unmasked. And then there was Kiss unmasked. It was a big deal that they wore makeup, and then it was going to be a media sensation that they weren't wearing the makeup. What did the album sound like? People didn't care so much about that because it was all about the visuals and the merchandising. Halloween. There were a few years in the late 70s when I would say in my neighborhood more than 50% of the boy population were a member of Kiss on Halloween. And this is, we're talking 1970s when Kiss was selling the plastic the plastic mask with the bib costume. You could buy one of those. But there were a lot of kids having mom draw the star on their eye and all of that sort of thing. It is very difficult to overstate. The 10-year-old boys were Swifties for Kiss in 1978. They just were. I could maybe go into a dive about Kiss musically at some point, but all about the visuals. So, you've been watching Punk and Paisley. My name's Chris. You know what to do with the likes and subscribes. I'd like your opinions. Tell me who I missed. I'm sure somebody didn't come to mind. Who in rock has the best visual gimmicks? Let me know in the comments. Tell me what I'm wrong about. Tell me what I'm right about. And until next time, kids, keep on rocking in the unfree world.